She stood on their porch with a bag of presents she had wrapped herself, and they closed the door in her face. She walked nearly 2 miles through the 28-degree night back to an empty apartment. When I found out, I didn't scream and I didn't argue. I made one phone call. 5 hours later, a certified letter arrived at my parents' house, and the color drained from their faces. My name is Nicole Turner. I'm 34 years old, and my daughter Lily is 10. If you're listening, consider subscribing and tell me where you're watching from. Now let me take you back to the week before Christmas, the week when something inside my family finally cracked open for good. That December, Lily and I were living in a small one-bedroom apartment near Capitol Boulevard in Raleigh, North Carolina. She had the bedroom. I slept on the couch. The radiator ticked every 40 minutes like an unwanted metronome, and the kitchen faucet dripped in a rhythm I'd eventually learn to ignore. It wasn't much, but for the moment, it was ours. I was in the middle of a divorce. 3 months earlier, my ex-husband Ryan had filed for primary custody, and my attorney had made one thing painfully clear. The judge would be looking for stability. Stable housing, steady income, a calm environment. Any disruption, any sign that Lily's life was chaotic, and Ryan's lawyer would use it against me. So I kept my head down. I worked night shifts in the ER at WakeMed Medical Center, picked up extra rotations whenever they were offered, and made sure every bill was paid on the first of the month. I couldn't afford a single mistake. My parents knew all of that. They knew the custody hearing was coming, and they used that knowledge the way someone uses a leash on a dog trying to run away. I'll explain that part later. During that week before Christmas, Lily sat at the kitchen table every evening after finishing her homework. She cut colored paper, folded little cards, and wrote names in her careful, rounded handwriting. She made one for my mother, Haley Turner, one for my father, Michael Turner, one for my brother, Brandon, one for his wife, Jessica, and 2 more for their kids. She wrapped small presents in old newspaper because real wrapping paper cost $4 a roll, and I had told her maybe next time. She never complained. She simply used the comic pages instead. On the card for my mother, she wrote, "Dear Grandma, I can't wait to see everyone. Love, Lily." Next to her name, she drew a small sun. She always drew that sun. She once told me it was so people would feel warm when they read her cards. There was a framed photograph in my parents' living room that had been there for as long as I could remember. It showed my great-grandmother, Eleanor Whitaker, standing in front of that house the day she bought it in 1987. On the back, in her handwriting, were the words, "For my family." All of them. I remember visiting that house when I was about 12. Eleanor rested her hand on my shoulder and said quietly, "This house is mine, Nicole. Remember that." I didn't understand why she said it with such certainty, like someone planting a flag in the ground. Later, I would. My mother, Haley Turner, was 60 and had never entered a room she couldn't control. At church, she organized the potluck dinners, remembered every birthday, and delivered casseroles to every funeral. People called her a saint. She liked the word and displayed it the way others display fine china. Inside the house, Haley decided everything. Who was invited to dinner, who sat where, who spoke, and when. My father, Michael, 62, had retired early from warehouse management. He spent most evenings in his recliner, agreeing with whatever my mother said. His silence was never neutral. It was a vote. My brother Brandon was 29 and had never paid rent a single day in his life. He sold cars in the North Hills district, earned an average salary, and spent money like he made twice that because our parents covered the difference. He and Jessica lived upstairs in the house that belonged to Eleanor Whitaker, rent-free. Brandon drove a truck our mother had bought for him using what she called her savings. No one ever asked where those savings came from. I paid for nursing school myself, with federal loans and night shifts waiting tables. When I got married, my mother told me, "Keep it simple, Nicole. An outdoor ceremony will do." When Brandon got married, she booked a $15,000 venue without blinking. When my marriage started falling apart, she said, "A woman should know how to keep her husband." When Brandon and Jessica nearly separated 2 years earlier, she told Jessica she needed to be more patient with him. Every week she called me, not to ask how I was doing, but to remind me not to do anything foolish before the custody hearing. The message underneath her words was always the same. If you cause trouble, you'll have nowhere to go, and the judge will hear about it. Once, I walked into the kitchen and saw my mother quickly close her laptop. For a moment, I caught a glimpse of a Verbo page on the screen. I didn't think much about it at the time. That was a mistake. The Christmas plan seemed simple. I was scheduled for a double shift from 6 in the evening until 6 the next morning. Holiday pay meant time and a half, and I needed every dollar from my lawyer's retainer. My parents would pick up Lily at 4, bring her to the house for Christmas dinner, and I would pick her up the next morning after my shift ended. "Of course," my mother, Haley Turner, said on the phone when I confirmed the plan. "Bring her over. We'll have a wonderful time." From somewhere in the background, I heard my father, Michael, add casually, "Yeah, just bring her." On Christmas Eve, Lily carefully laid out the outfit she planned to wear. It was a green sweater she had found at Goodwill, the one she insisted made her look extra Christmassy. She packed the presents she'd made into a canvas tote bag, each gift labeled with a small tag. On every tag, she had drawn the same little sun. That afternoon, I packed her things with the precision of someone preparing for deployment. Heavy coat, wool hat, gloves, scarf. I slipped a granola bar into her pocket in case dinner ran late. Then I added one more thing, an old phone of mine. It had no apps and no data plan, only the ability to make calls. I programmed 2 numbers into it, mine and Dana Brooks's. Dana was my closest friend and a nurse who worked the same ER shifts with me at Wake Med Medical Center. She had known Lily since the day she was born. If something happened and I was buried in a trauma case or stuck in a dead zone inside the hospital, Lily could call Dana. "Just in case," I told her. "If you can't reach me, call Aunt Dana." Lily slipped the phone into her coat pocket and smiled at me. "Mom, relax. It's just Grandma and Grandpa's house." At 3:45 on Christmas Day, I kissed her forehead in the hospital parking lot. I watched her climb into my mother's car with her bag of gifts, her green sweater, and those little suns she loved to draw. Then I walked into the ER. That was the last time I saw my daughter smile for several days. Everything I'm about to describe comes from 3 sources. What Lily told me afterward, the voicemail she left on my phone, and the call log from the old phone I had given her. I wasn't there. At the moment it happened, I was inserting an IV into a 60-year-old man who had come in with chest pain. But I have replayed this story so many times that I can see it clearly now, almost as if I had been standing on that porch myself. At 5:15 p.m., my mother's car pulled into the driveway of the house in Oakwood Historic District. The windows glowed with warm light. Garland wrapped around the porch railing. A wreath hung on the front door, the new one my mother bought every year. Inside there was laughter. The Nat King Cole Christmas album was playing the way it always did. The smell of roast turkey and rosemary stuffing drifted through the doorframe. Lily climbed the steps holding her tote bag. My mother let her inside. She stood in the hallway listening to the sounds coming from the dining room. Brandon, Jessica, their kids, and my father were already seated there. Lily began to take off her coat. Then my mother walked into the kitchen. From the hallway, Lily could hear low voices. Someone said her name. Brandon's voice. Then my mother's. After that, there was a short silence. At 5:30, my mother came back. The warmth had vanished from her face. In its place was that calm, practical expression she used whenever she was about to say something cruel and frame it as reasonable. "Lily, sweetie," she said gently, "we've got a little problem. The table is full. Brandon's in-laws stopped by at the last minute. There just isn't any room tonight. You should probably head home. Your mom will be back in the morning." Lily looked down at the tote bag in her hands. "But I brought presents for everyone." My mother glanced at the bag the way someone glances at a flyer handed out on the street. "That's sweet. Just leave them on the porch. We'll open them later." Behind her, my father stood in the hallway. He said nothing. From the dining room, Brandon briefly looked over his shoulder, then turned back to the table. Later, Lily told me what she noticed in that moment. She looked past my mother into the dining room and counted the chairs around the table. There were 12. One of them was empty. Then the door closed. The wreath on the door shook once and became still again. Inside, Nat King Cole kept singing. My daughter stood on the porch holding a bag full of gifts nobody wanted. She didn't cry. She simply turned around and started walking. The temperature was 28 degrees that evening. I checked the weather records afterward. December 25th, 6 o'clock. Raleigh. Wind chill 22. Light flurries drifting through the air, the kind of cold that slips through every gap in your coat and stays there. Lily walked 1.7 miles from my parents' house back to our apartment near Capitol Boulevard. I mapped the route later on my phone while standing in the kitchen, staring at the thin blue line on the screen as if it might somehow explain what had happened. 1.7 miles past houses glowing with Christmas lights, past windows where families sat together around dinner tables, down long stretches where the streetlights were too far apart and the sidewalk vanished for a block near an auto repair shop. She carried the tote bag the entire way, every present. She didn't leave them on the porch like my mother had told her. She brought them home. By the time she reached the apartment, the newspaper wrapping was damp from the falling snow. Inside, the apartment was dark. Before leaving for work, I had turned the heat down to 60 degrees. There was no reason to warm an empty place, I had thought. Lily would be at my parents' house all evening. Lily unlocked the apartment door, switched on a single lamp, and sat on the edge of her bed without even taking off her coat. At 5:43, she tried calling me. I didn't answer. I was in the middle of a trauma case. She tried again at 5:45. Straight to voicemail. At 5:47, she called Dana Brooks. Dana answered on the second ring. Later, she told me that the moment she heard Lily's voice, calm, small, strangely precise, she grabbed her car keys before Lily even finished the sentence. At 5:52, Lily left me a voicemail. 23 seconds. I've listened to it more times than I will ever admit. "Mom, Grandma said there's no room. I walked home. I'm okay. I'm in the apartment. Merry Christmas, Mom." Dana pulled into our parking lot at 6:02 p.m. She took a photo when she walked in. I still have it. The timestamp reads 6:02 p.m., December 25th. Lily is sitting on the bed, still wearing her coat. The tote bag of gifts rests on the floor beside her. One lamp is on. The rest of the apartment behind her disappears into darkness. Dana wrapped her in a blanket, turned the heat up, and took her home for the night. By 6:30, Lily was sitting at Dana's kitchen table, eating leftover lasagna with Dana's cat curled in her lap. She was safe. But I didn't know any of that yet. At that exact moment, I was still in the ER, checking vital signs, updating charts, and assuming my daughter was sitting at my parents' dining table opening gifts beside a Christmas tree in a house full of people who loved her. I checked my phone at 10:32 p.m. during a 15-minute break. 3 missed calls from Dana. 1 voicemail from Lily. No calls. No messages. Not a single word from my mother Haley, my father Michael, or my brother Brandon. I played Lily's voicemail first. I stood in the hospital break room with my back against a cold metal locker and listened to my 10-year-old daughter wish me Merry Christmas from an apartment she never should have been sitting in that night. Her voice was steady, thin but steady. She wasn't crying. Somehow that made it worse. It meant she had already decided this was something she had to handle alone. I played it again. Then I played it a third time because some small part of my brain was waiting for the words to change. Finally, I called Dana. She picked up immediately. "She's okay," Dana said. "She's asleep now. She's at my place." Then she added quietly, "Nicole, she walked home alone, in the dark, on Christmas." Dana had already sent the photo. I opened it on my phone. My daughter sitting on that bed, coat still on, one lamp glowing beside her, the bag of gifts on the floor, the rest of the room swallowed by shadow. I stared at that image for a long time. The light touched only half of Lily's face. Behind her there was nothing. No tree, no music, no family. Just dark furniture and empty space. "Thank you, Dana," I finally said. "I'll finish my shift." She paused. "Nicole, I'll finish my shift," I repeated. And I did. I walked back onto the floor. I charted medications, changed dressings, and spoke to patients in the calm voice nurses are trained to use when the room is falling apart and you are the one person who cannot afford to show it. I did not call my mother. I did not call my father. I did not call Brandon. There was nothing left to discuss. From that moment forward, there was only documentation. When my shift ended at 6 a.m., I sat in my car inside the hospital parking garage for about 4 minutes. The engine was running, the heater blowing warm air, my phone resting in my hand. I scrolled through my contacts and stopped on one name, Eleanor Whitaker. I didn't call her yet, not at 6 in the morning, but I would. And when I did, things would start moving in a direction my parents had never imagined. Because they had spent 12 years living in a house they believed was theirs, and they had never once bothered to read the paperwork that said otherwise. My mother called me at 8:14 a.m. the next morning, December 26th. I know the exact time because I recorded the call. In North Carolina, only one person needs to know a conversation is being recorded for it to be legal. I pressed record before I answered. Working years in emergency medicine had taught me one rule. When something is about to go wrong, document first and react later. "Nicole," my mother said brightly, almost cheerfully. "I heard Lily went home last night. I'm not sure what happened. I told her to wait 10 minutes while I rearranged the seating, but she just left. Kids can be so dramatic." I let the silence sit for 3 seconds. Then I said, "Lily called me at 5:52. She said you told her there was no room. She walked home." I heard it immediately, the shift in her tone, the quiet recalculation behind that polished voice. "Well, it was chaotic," Haley replied. "Brandon's mother-in-law arrived unexpectedly. I had to make a decision. What was I supposed to do? Ask an elderly guest to leave for a child?" "You asked a 10-year-old to leave." Another silence. 4 seconds this time. Then my mother shifted into offense. "Oh, don't start with me, Nicole. I have supported you through this entire mess, housing you, watching your child, helping you out. And this is the thanks I get. You are just like your father's side of the family. Ungrateful, every single one of you." Her voice sharpened, rising slightly, not loud, but cutting. "And let me tell you something," she continued. "If you turn this into a problem, don't expect us to show up at your custody hearing. Don't expect a place to stay. Don't expect anything." The call lasted 7 minutes and 23 seconds. I recorded every word, including the final sentence she spoke before hanging up. The last thing my mother said before hanging up was something she clearly meant as a threat. I treated it as evidence.
"Do anything stupid, Nicole," she snapped, "and I'll make sure that judge knows exactly what kind of mother you are."
The line went dead. I placed the phone on the kitchen counter and looked at the recording file. 7 minutes, 23 seconds. December 26th, 8:14 a.m. Then I created a new folder on my phone. I named it Receipts. At 8:45 a.m., my brother, Brandon Turner, started texting. Not calling. Brandon had never liked conversations that required hearing the other person's voice. 8:45 a.m. Mom said you're making a huge deal out of last night. Seriously? 8:47 a.m. Lily is fine. Kids walk home all the time. Stop being dramatic. 8:52 a.m. You need to apologize to Mom. She's crying. 9:01 a.m. If you keep pushing this, I swear, I'll tell your ex's lawyer you're unstable. I didn't respond to a single message. Instead, I screenshotted every one of them and dropped them into the receipts folder. By mid-morning, the machine had already started moving. My mother, Haley, had called her sister Patricia Sullivan and delivered her version of the story. In that version, I had abandoned Lily at their house and then blamed them for it. Patricia called me at 10:15 a.m. Her voice sounded soft and concerned, though the concern wasn't really for me. "Sweetheart, your mom is just devastated," she said gently. "Can't you let this go? It's Christmas." "Did she tell you Lily walked home alone in the dark?" I asked. There was a pause. "She said Lily left on her own." "Lily is 10, Patricia." Another pause. Longer this time. She didn't have an answer for that, so she said she would pray for the family and ended the call. I was about to set my phone down when it buzzed again. Another message from Brandon, but this one was different. It was the kind of mistake that happens when someone is texting two conversations at once and sends the wrong message to the wrong person. 9:22 a.m. Don't worry, Mom. She won't do anything. She needs us for the custody hearing. She's trapped. The message had been meant for my mother. I read it twice. Then I screenshotted it and saved it in the receipts folder beneath the others. Brandon was right about one thing. I did need them. For 6 more weeks. The custody hearing was scheduled for February 6th. After that, the leash came off. What Brandon didn't realize was that he only understood half the situation. He thought I was trapped. People who believe you're trapped eventually stop paying attention to what they say, and that's when they start making mistakes. To understand why Christmas night mattered so much, you need a little background. What happened didn't appear out of nowhere. It was simply the loudest note in a pattern that had been playing my entire life. In the Turner family, there were 2 types of children: the investment and the expense. Brandon was the investment. I was the expense. Brandon dropped out of community college after 3 semesters. My parents paid every cent of his tuition anyway. I paid for nursing school myself, with federal loans and waitressing shifts that left my feet throbbing by midnight. When I graduated, my mother said, "Well, at least you finished something." When Brandon landed his car sales job, she threw him a celebration dinner. When I got married, my mother told me to keep things simple. "An outdoor ceremony will do, Nicole. No need to go overboard." I planned the wedding I could afford. 2 years later, when Brandon married Jessica, my mother booked a chandelier-lit venue and wrote a $15,000 check without hesitation. She called it an investment in his future. When my marriage began to fall apart, she told me, "A woman should know how to keep her husband." When Brandon and Jessica nearly separated during a messy stretch of credit card debt, my mother said Jessica simply needed to be more patient. And then there was how they treated Lily. Brandon's children, Ethan, 5, and Maddie, 3, were my mother's pride and joy. She posted photos of them on Facebook constantly. Matching Easter outfits, pumpkin patches in October, Christmas pajamas in December, her grandchildren, front and center. Lily was rarely described that way. She was usually referred to as Nicole's kid, sometimes simply the girl. The Christmas before the one I'm telling you about, Lily had been seated at a folding card table in the hallway, while everyone else sat in the dining room. When she asked why, my mother told her, "The big table is for immediate family, Lily." Lily looked at her and asked quietly, "Am I not immediate family?" My mother changed the subject, and I swallowed it. At the time, I was 2 months into divorce proceedings, sleeping on a couch and terrified that one wrong move would cost me my daughter in family court. So I swallowed it, the same way I had swallowed things from that family for 30 years. But someone else heard about that moment through a phone call I didn't even know had been made. Eleanor Whitaker, my great-grandmother. She heard about it, and she said nothing. Not yet. She was waiting. I just didn't know what for. Now let me explain the house. It was a 3-story colonial on a quiet, tree-lined street in Raleigh's Oakwood Historic District. White siding, black shutters, a wide wraparound porch. Eleanor Whitaker bought that house in 1987, paying cash after 40 years of bookkeeping work and a pension from the Wake County school system. She raised her son, my grandfather, there. When he passed away in 2003, she remained in the house for 2 more years. Then in 2005, she created a legal trust and transferred the property into it, naming herself as trustee. There was one clause in that trust I wouldn't read until many years later. The property shall serve the family, all members, without exclusion. In 2012, Eleanor moved into Durham Senior Living Center. My parents moved into the house. No lease, no rent, just a verbal promise that they would look after the place. 3 years later, Brandon and Jessica moved into the upstairs floor, also rent-free, also without a lease. For 12 years, my parents lived in that house without paying a single dollar. And somewhere along the way, they began speaking about it as if it belonged to them. Our home. The family house. The place we've poured our lives into. As if the woman who had actually bought it, the woman now sitting in a nursing home an hour away, had somehow disappeared. The house also had a basement. It had once been the family room where I watched movies with Eleanor as a child. 3 years earlier, my mother had renovated it. She installed a new lock and added a private entrance from the side yard. She told everyone the basement was damp and unsafe. She told Eleanor it had a mold problem. No one went down there anymore. That night, December 26th, after Brandon's accidental text and Patricia's phone call, I opened the Verbo app and typed in my parents' address. It took about 4 seconds. Cozy Basement Suite, Raleigh, North Carolina. 52 reviews. Superhost. $110 per night. Host, Haley T. I scrolled through the photos, and there it was. The old basement that used to belong to Eleanor Whitaker. The same room where I had watched movies with her as a child. The wood-paneled walls were still there, the brick fireplace too. But now the room had new furniture, fresh linens, and a small basket of toiletries sitting neatly on the nightstand. 52 5-star reviews, all inside a house that didn't belong to my mother. And in the same basement, she had told a 90-year-old woman was too dangerous to enter. I took screenshots of everything. The listing, the reviews, the nightly rate, the host profile. Timestamp, December 26th, 11:30 p.m. Then I closed the app, set my phone on the kitchen counter, and sat there in silence for a long time. The next morning, I was going to call Eleanor Whitaker. I made the call at 7:15 a.m. on December 27th. Early, but Eleanor had always been a morning person. One of the nurses at Durham Senior Living Center once told me she was usually dressed and reading by 6:30. She answered on the third ring. Her voice sounded exactly the same as it always had, thin, rough with age, but sharp and precise. Like a blade that had been sharpened so many times it had grown narrow but never lost its edge. "Nicole," she said, "you're calling early. What happened?" So I told her. I told her about Lily standing at the door, about the excuse that there was no room, about the walk home through the cold, about the dark apartment, about the voicemail. When I finished, Eleanor went quiet. Not the silence of someone who hadn't heard me, the silence of someone counting. I waited. 10 seconds. I know because I counted. Finally, she spoke. That house has 12 chairs around the table, she said calmly, and a table that seats 14. I bought every one of them. I told her about the Verbo listing, the basement rental, the reviews, the $110 a night under Haley's name. Another silence. 5 seconds this time. So, she said slowly, she is making money from my house while turning away my great-granddaughter on Christmas. It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. Nicole, she said, do you still have the screenshots? Yes, ma'am. Good. I'm calling Thomas Caldwell this morning. Thomas Caldwell was Eleanor's estate attorney. He had created the trust back in 2005 and had managed every update since. I had met him once years earlier. Quiet, methodical, the type of man who wore the same gray suit every day and remembered every clause in every document. Before hanging up, Eleanor added something else. I already knew something wasn't right, she said. Last Christmas, Lily called me to wish me Merry Christmas. She told me she had to sit at a little table in the hallway. I asked Haley about it. She said Lily preferred it that way. Eleanor paused. I believed her, she said quietly. I will not make that mistake again. That same morning, while my mother was posting cheerful Christmas photos on Facebook, pictures taken at a dinner table Lily had not been allowed to sit at, captioned, Blessed family time. A 90-year-old woman in Durham was on the phone with her attorney, and the clock had started. Thomas Caldwell called me at 2:15 that afternoon. His voice sounded exactly as I expected. Calm, deliberate, the tone of someone who had already weighed every word before speaking. Miss Turner, he said, your great-grandmother has informed me of the situation. I've reviewed the trust documents and I'd like to explain where things currently stand. The call lasted maybe 4 minutes. I wrote most of it down on the back of a grocery receipt while standing in my kitchen. Here's the short version. The house was owned by the Whitaker Family Living Trust, created in 2005. Eleanor Whitaker was the sole trustee. My parents, Haley and Michael Turner, had no lease, no deed, and no ownership claim of any kind. Legally, they were what the law calls permissive occupants, people allowed to stay on the property only as long as the owner allows it. And that permission could be revoked with 30 days written notice. Clear, simple, black and white. Your grandmother has instructed me to take 2 immediate steps, Thomas said. First, I will prepare a 30-day notice to vacate addressed to Haley and Michael Turner. Second, I will draft an amendment to the trust removing them as beneficiaries and naming you as the sole beneficiary, with Lily listed as contingent beneficiary. I leaned against the counter. How soon? I asked. The notice will be sent by certified mail tomorrow, December 28th. I will personally bring the trust amendment to your grandmother's facility tomorrow morning for signature. I have already arranged for a notary and 2 witnesses. I said yes. Then he added something that made my hand tighten around the edge of the counter. There is also a secondary matter, he said. If Haley Turner has been collecting rental income from trust property without the trustee's knowledge or permission, that could legally qualify as conversion of trust property income. I'll need everything you have. The listing, screenshots, reviews, all of it. That night, I emailed him the entire receipts folder. Every screenshot, every timestamp. Organized the same way I organized patient charts at the hospital. Because when you work in medicine long enough, you learn something important. Documentation is not just a habit, it's survival. Thomas replied at 9:47 p.m. Received. This documentation is comprehensive. We will proceed tomorrow. Somewhere across Raleigh, my mother was probably sitting comfortably in a house she didn't own, sleeping in rooms she had never paid for, and spending money she had quietly taken from a basement she claimed was unsafe. She had no idea that by the next day, her name would be removed from a legal document, and replaced with mine. On December 28th, Lily and I drove to Durham. The drive took about an hour. Winter sunlight spread pale and flat across the windshield as we moved along the highway. Lily didn't ask where we were going. I had simply told her we were visiting Great-Grandma Eleanor. And for the first time since Christmas, I saw a small spark of excitement return to her face. The nursing home smelled exactly the way it always did. Lemon disinfectant, cafeteria coffee, and a faint floral spray the staff used in the hallways that never quite managed to cover the rest. Eleanor Whitaker was sitting in the common room when we arrived. Her wheelchair was positioned straight, her back perfectly upright, a blue cardigan buttoned neatly to the collar. Beside her stood Thomas Caldwell in his usual gray suit, a leather folder open on the table. Next to him was a woman holding a notary stamp, along with 2 nursing home staff members. I recognized Linda from the front desk and a CNA named Terrence, who had always been especially kind to Eleanor. Lily saw her first. "Great-Grandma Eleanor!" Eleanor's face softened immediately, the sharpness around her eyes easing as she opened her arms. "Come here, little son." Lily hugged her carefully, the way children instinctively become gentle around someone small and fragile. Eleanor held her for a long moment, one hand resting on the back of Lily's head. Then she leaned back and studied her. "Did you have a good Christmas, sweetheart?" Lily hesitated. She glanced at me, then back at Eleanor. "It's all right," Eleanor said quietly. "The next one will be different. I promise you that." Then she turned to Thomas and gave a single nod. "Business." Thomas opened the folder and began reading the amendment summary aloud. His voice was steady and formal, every word chosen with the precision of something meant to stand in court. Haley Turner and Michael Turner removed as beneficiaries. Nicole Turner named sole beneficiary. Lily Turner named contingent beneficiary. The house, the trust assets, the entire structure Eleanor had spent 40 years building with careful saving and planning, redirected in a matter of minutes. Eleanor signed the amendment. Her hand trembled slightly, but the signature itself was firm. The notary stamped the document. Linda and Terrence signed as witnesses. Then Thomas slid another paper across the table. The 30-day notice to vacate. Eleanor signed that too. Afterwards, she asked for a plain sheet of lined paper from Linda's desk. Not a legal document, just notebook paper. Her handwriting wasn't as tight as it once had been, but it was still clear. She wrote, "Haley, I gave you my home so my family would always have a place. You turned away a child on Christmas. That is not what my home is for. Eleanor." She folded the paper, placed it inside the envelope with the notice, and looked at Thomas. "Send it." Thomas sealed the envelope and addressed it. "Certified mail. Return receipt requested." Before we left, Eleanor reached for my hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "I'm 89, Nicole," she said quietly. "I've buried a husband, a son, and 2 close friends this year alone. But I am not too old to protect what belongs to me." Then she squeezed my hand once more. "And Lily belongs to me, too." By 4 p.m. that afternoon, a sealed envelope was sitting inside a blue USPS collection box outside the Durham post office, addressed to Haley and Michael Turner. Stamped, certified, and heading toward Raleigh. That night, after Lily had fallen asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open while the apartment settled into silence. The radiator clicked softly. The faucet dripped. I began building the case. I organized the receipts folder the same way I organized medical files at the hospital. Chronological, labeled, nothing missing, nothing out of place. Every item had a date, a source, and a 1-line description. Voicemail, 23 seconds, December 25th, 5:52 p.m. Photo from Dana Brooks. Lily sitting on the bed in a dark apartment. Timestamp, 6:02 p.m. Phone recording, Haley Turner call, 7 minutes, 23 seconds, December 26th, 8:14 a.m. Brandon's texts. All 5 messages, including the ones sent to the wrong person. Patricia Sullivan call, summary with timestamp. Then the Verbo evidence, the listing, the 52 reviews, the $110 nightly rate. Host, Haley T., Superhost badge. The listing photos showed Eleanor's basement completely renovated. New furniture, clean sheets, and a basket of complimentary toiletries sitting in a room an 89-year-old woman had been told was too damp to enter. I read through the reviews one by one looking for details. Most were ordinary. Great location, very clean, responsive host, but one from 6 months earlier made me stop. Wonderful stay. Haley even showed us the family photos in the living room. Such a warm, welcoming home. Family photos in the living room. My mother had been inviting strangers into Eleanor's house, pointing out pictures of our family on the walls, playing the gracious host, while earning money she had no right to collect from a property she did not own, and from a family she had just shut the door on. I emailed the entire folder to Thomas Caldwell at 11:15 p.m. His reply came 32 minutes later. Received. This documentation is comprehensive. I will include the Verbo records in the supplementary demand letter. The demand letter, that would be the second envelope. The first one ordered my parents to leave. The second one would tell them exactly how much they owed. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark kitchen for a while, listening to the radiator, the faucet, and Lily breathing softly in the next room. 2 envelopes, one already in the mail, the other being drafted. My parents didn't know about either of them. February 6th. 9 days after Christmas, the day the leash finally came off. Wake County Family Court, 2nd floor, courtroom 2B. Fluorescent lights, beige walls, an American flag hanging beside the judge's bench. I sat at the petitioner's table wearing a navy blazer I had bought from a consignment shop and pressed the night before. My attorney sat beside me. Across the aisle sat my ex-husband, Ryan, and his lawyer. Ryan's arms were folded across his chest. His jaw was tight. He looked at me the way someone looks at a problem they believe they have already solved. The hearing lasted 40 minutes. My attorney presented the file methodically. Stable employment, 12 years working as an ER nurse at Wake Med Medical Center, my current apartment lease. Character references from 2 supervising physicians and Lily's school counselor. Then he presented the letter Thomas Caldwell had prepared. It confirmed that I would soon be moving into a family-owned property through the Whitaker Family Living Trust, where I had been named beneficiary. Stable housing, stable income, stable environment. Ryan's lawyer tried to argue instability, the small apartment, my night shifts, the fact that I was recently divorced. But he had nothing solid to work with. No evidence of neglect, no reports of harm, and the one card my mother had threatened to play, declaring me an unfit parent, never appeared. Haley Turner didn't show up. She didn't submit a statement. I still don't know whether she chose not to, or whether she was too busy dealing with the certified envelope that had arrived at her door that same morning. USPS tracking confirmed it. Delivered, February 6th, 1:23 p.m. Signed, H. Turner. The judge gave his ruling at 10:40 a.m. Full physical custody to me. Ryan would have scheduled visitation every other weekend and alternating holidays. The judge signed the order. The clerk stamped it. My attorney handed me a copy. I walked out of that courthouse holding 2 pieces of paper. One said my daughter was mine. The other, the trust amendment, said my silence was over. That same morning in Raleigh, a mail carrier had climbed the steps to my parents' porch and handed over an envelope that required a signature. My mother had signed for it at 1:23 p.m. She probably expected a late Christmas card, maybe a bill, or one of those charity letters she usually tossed away without reading. She didn't throw this one away. Haley called me at 1:47 p.m., 24 minutes after opening the envelope. I know the exact time because I was sitting in my car in the courthouse parking lot, still holding the custody order, when my phone rang and her name appeared on the screen. I let it ring 3 times, then I answered. Her voice sounded nothing like it had 2 days earlier. The calm, polished tone was gone. Now it was high and fraying, like a wall that had suddenly lost its support beams. "What is this?" she demanded. "What did you do? This says we have 30 days to leave. This is our house, Nicole." I watched a woman pushing a stroller across the parking lot, bundled against the cold. Then I said quietly, "It's Eleanor Whitaker's house. It has always been Eleanor Whitaker's house." "Your grandmother is senile," my mother snapped. "She has no idea what she's signing. I'll contest this. I'll take this to court." "She was evaluated by her physician last week," I replied. "She's fully competent." "The amendment and the notice are both valid." I could hear my father Michael in the background, his voice muffled and agitated. A moment later, he took the phone. "Nicole, this is ridiculous. We've lived here for 18 years. You can't just—" "I didn't," I said. "Eleanor did. You have 30 days. He went quiet. My mother grabbed the phone back. "Where are we supposed to go?" she demanded. I let the silence stretch for 3 seconds. Then I said, "I don't know, Mom. Maybe somewhere with enough room." She heard it. I know she heard it, because the line went dead immediately. She didn't hang up carefully. She hung up the way people do when the ground shifts under their feet, and they haven't decided yet whether it's an earthquake or just the beginning of one. The certified mail receipt was already logged in Thomas Caldwell's office. Delivered, signed, time-stamped. The 30-day clock had started. There was no unsigned version of that letter. No undo button, no, "let's talk about this over dinner." Just a legal document inside a sealed envelope and a handwritten note from an 89-year-old woman who remembered exactly how many chairs sat around her dining table. I started the car, pulled out of the courthouse parking lot, and drove to pick Lily up from school. Let me pause here for a moment. Some of you listening probably know exactly what that moment feels like. The moment someone tells you there's no place for you. If you've ever felt that, you understand. Now let me keep going, because what my mother did next was something I still struggle to believe. Her first instinct wasn't to apologize. It wasn't to call Eleanor. It wasn't even to call a lawyer. Her first instinct was to perform. On February 7th, the day after the notice arrived, my mother made a public Facebook post. Not friends only, public. She wanted it to spread. "Please pray for our family. Our eldest daughter is manipulating her elderly grandmother, an 89-year-old woman in a nursing home, to take away our home. We have poured our hearts and our lives into this house for nearly 2 decades. We are devastated. Please keep us in your thoughts and prayers." Oh, Janet, how awful. Stay strong, honey. Some children don't realize what they have until it's gone. One woman from her church wrote, "This is heartbreaking. Your family is in our prayers." 3 people called me heartless. Not one of them knew that a child had walked home alone in the dark because of the woman they were praying for. Brandon jumped into the thread next. His comment was pinned near the top. "My sister is trying to steal our inheritance. Don't be fooled." Then my mother called Pastor Daniel Reeves. He was a genuinely kind man, but he lived in my mother's orbit long enough that he usually heard only her side of things. He called me that evening. "Nicole," he said gently, "your mother is really struggling right now. Perhaps we could all sit down together and talk." "Pastor Reeves," I replied, "did my mother tell you she turned my 10-year-old daughter away from Christmas dinner?" There was a pause. She said it was a misunderstanding. "My daughter left me a voicemail that night from an empty apartment," I said. "It's 23 seconds long. Would you like to hear it?" He didn't answer that question. He simply said he would pray for the situation. I thanked him and ended the call. Then I took screenshots of the Facebook post. All of it went into the receipts folder. I didn't post a response. I didn't comment. I didn't correct anyone publicly. There would be a moment for the truth to come out, but it wouldn't be on Facebook, and it wouldn't be on my mother's terms. Meanwhile, Thomas Caldwell was drafting the second letter. The first week of January felt like standing alone in an open field while something circled overhead. 4 relatives called me in 5 days. Every single one had spoken to my mother first. Every single one used almost the exact same script. Just apologize, Nicole. Think about your parents' age. You're tearing the family apart. Patricia Sullivan called again. Sweetheart, can't you just come to dinner and talk this out? Your mom is beside herself. Patricia, I asked quietly, did she tell you about the Verbo listing? The one where she rented Eleanor's basement for 3 years without telling her? Patricia went silent. I don't know anything about that, she said finally. Then she said she had to go. Not one person asked how Lily was doing. Not once. In 5 straight days of phone calls, not a single relative asked how a 10-year-old girl was doing after being told she didn't belong at her own family's Christmas table. Tuesday night, Dana Brooks stopped by after our shifts overlapped. She brought pizza and a bottle of cheap wine and climbed onto my kitchen counter the same way she had been doing since we were 22. Lily was already asleep. You're not crazy, Dana said, chewing the edge of a pizza crust. And you're not the villain here. That voicemail exists. Those screenshots exist. Reality isn't something people get to vote on. Eleanor Whitaker called every evening that week. The conversations were short, 2 or 3 minutes at most, but her voice stayed steady, like a railing on a staircase you're afraid to climb. Thomas is handling the legal side, she would say. You just hold on. One night, she told me something I had never heard before. In 1978, she said quietly, my mother-in-law told me I wasn't welcome at Thanksgiving dinner. She said I didn't cook well enough to sit at her table. I was 28 years old and holding a baby. She paused. I remember the walk to the car. I remember how cold it was. Her voice thinned slightly, but the words stayed firm. I promised myself that no woman in my family would ever feel that way again. I intend to keep that promise. That same night, I was tucking Lily into bed when she asked a question she had clearly been holding inside for too long. Her voice was quiet, almost careful. Mom, does Grandma not like me because I'm a problem? I held her there in that small bedroom while the radiator ticked and the distant city noise drifted through the window. You are not a problem, I told her. You have never been a problem. She nodded against my shoulder and didn't ask again. But later that night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and made a decision that had already been forming in my mind. This would never happen to her again. Not from them. Not from anyone. My mother hired a lawyer during the second week of January. Not an estate attorney. Not a trust specialist. Just a general practice lawyer working out of a strip mall office off Capitol Boulevard, with a website showing a stock photo of a gavel and the slogan, Fighting for Your Rights. His name was Robert Klein. His first move was to send Thomas Caldwell a letter, printed on such thin paper you could practically read through it. The letter claimed that Haley and Michael Turner had lived in the house continuously for 18 years, maintained the property, paid the utilities, and made improvements consistent with what he called an implied tenancy. Therefore, he argued, the 30-day eviction notice was invalid and unenforceable. Thomas called me the next morning. If I hadn't known him well, I might have mistaken his tone for boredom. But it wasn't boredom. It was the calm of a man who had practiced law for 30 years and had seen this exact argument more times than he could count.
An implied tenancy requires proof of rent payments or a written lease, he said.
Your parents have neither. They are permissive occupants. The notice stands. Thomas's response to Robert Klein was 4 pages long. Attached were a certified copy of the Whitaker family living trust deed showing Eleanor Whitaker as sole owner and trustee, a letter from Dr. Samuel Hart at Durham Senior Living Center confirming Eleanor's full cognitive competency, the notarized trust amendment removing my parents as beneficiaries, and finally, almost like a grenade placed quietly at the end of the file, a summary of the Verbo listing, including the Superhost badge, the 52 reviews, and an estimate of the total income earned from the basement rental. The last paragraph of Thomas's letter read, "Should your clients wish to dispute this notice in court, we are fully prepared to file an unlawful detainer action. We also intend to pursue a separate claim for conversion of trust property income in the estimated amount of $64,200. We would welcome the opportunity to present the Verbo revenue documentation before a judge." Thomas told me what happened next. Robert Klein called him directly. Not by letter this time. The confidence had disappeared from his voice. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, "I need to be honest with my clients. If you can prove that Verbo income, it's publicly listed on the internet," Thomas replied calmly. 52 reviews. There was a long silence. Then Robert Klein said he would advise his clients to reconsider their position. 2 days later, Brandon told me that my mother's lawyer had strongly recommended she not contest the eviction notice. She fired him anyway. Not because he was wrong, because he had said something out loud that she didn't want to hear. Brandon called me one Wednesday afternoon in mid-January. I almost ignored it, not out of spite, but because seeing his name on my phone had started to feel like a weather alert for a storm I was already standing in. But I answered. His voice sounded different. The swagger was gone. What remained sounded like someone who had just done the math and didn't like the answer. "Nicole, listen," he said. "I didn't know about the Verbo thing. That was Mom. I just live here. You can't throw me out. I've got 2 kids. You've lived in a house you don't own for 5 years without paying rent," I said calmly. "You told me I was trapped. You threatened to call my ex's lawyer, and you sat at that table on Christmas while your 10-year-old niece was told there was no room for her." I paused. "Don't call me about your kids." Silence filled the line. Then, for a moment, the old Brandon resurfaced. "This is insane," he snapped. "You're using an old woman to get revenge on us. Great-grandma doesn't even know what she's signing." "She knew exactly what she was signing," I said. "She told me there were 12 chairs and a table that seats 14. She counted. She remembers." He hung up. 20 minutes later, I saw a message appear in the family group chat. Brandon had posted it in all caps. "Nicole is destroying this family. She turned great-grandma against us. This is elder abuse." Elder abuse. Because a 90-year-old woman had decided to protect a 10-year-old one. I took a screenshot of Brandon's message and sent it to Thomas Caldwell. His reply came back almost immediately. "Noted. Eleanor Whitaker's physician affidavit and the notarized witness statements will address any competency challenge. If they wish to file, they are welcome to try." What Brandon didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Eleanor had already anticipated that accusation back on December 28th, when Thomas brought the trust amendment to the nursing home. Along with the legal documents, he had also brought a signed affidavit from Dr. Samuel Hart. The statement used clear medical language that left no room for interpretation. It confirmed that Eleanor Whitaker was alert, fully oriented to person, place, time, and situation, and entirely competent to manage her legal and financial affairs. Dated, signed, notarized, filed with the trust documents. My mother called me manipulative. My brother called it elder abuse, but the paperwork told a different story. And paper doesn't flinch when someone raises their voice at it. At the end of January, 3 weeks into the eviction notice, my mother drove to Durham. I wasn't there. I only learned what happened later that evening from Eleanor, and Thomas later confirmed the details through the nursing home's incident report. So I'm telling this exactly the way it was described by two people who had no reason to exaggerate. Haley Turner walked into the nursing home lobby at 11:40 a.m. She was dressed the way she always dressed when she wanted to make an impression. Beige wool coat, pearl stud earrings. The posture of a woman used to being welcomed wherever she went. She approached the front desk. "I'm here to see Eleanor Whitaker," she said. "I'm her granddaughter-in-law." Linda, the same receptionist who had witnessed the trust amendment signing, checked her computer and then looked back up. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said politely. "Ms. Whitaker updated her visitor authorization list. Your name isn't on it." Haley's smile held for a moment. Then it began to crack. "That must be a mistake," she said. "I've known her for 30 years. I'm family." "I understand," Linda replied calmly. "But we follow the resident's instructions. I'm not able to authorize this visit." The smile disappeared. Haley asked to speak with a supervisor. The supervisor told her the same thing, politely and firmly, the way healthcare workers learn to do when someone powerful is not used to hearing the word no. Then Haley began to cry. Or at least, she produced the sounds and posture of crying. She remained in the lobby for about 12 minutes. When it became clear that tears weren't going to open the door, the supervisor said gently, "Ma'am, if you're unable to leave on your own, we'll need to contact security." Haley left. From the parking lot, she called my father. I know this because Linda later told Eleanor what Haley said as she walked out, loud enough that several people in the lobby turned to look. "That girl has poisoned her against us." Then Haley tried something else. She called Eleanor directly. Eleanor answered. She told me later she allowed Haley to talk for about 15 seconds, the usual performance. "Eleanor, please. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. We love you. We would never." Then Eleanor interrupted. "There was no misunderstanding, Haley," she said calmly. "You turned away a child, my great-granddaughter, on Christmas, in my house. And you rented out my basement for money you never told me about." Haley started to stammer. "That's not... I was going to..." "This conversation is finished," Eleanor said. "Speak to Thomas." Then she hung up. The nursing home visitor log recorded the visit with Linda's initials and the exact time. The incident report noted it in clinical language. Visitor became verbally agitated in lobby, declined to leave when asked, departed after security was mentioned, no physical incident. Another piece of paper, another timestamp, another entry in a file that was getting thicker by the day. The second envelope arrived on February 3rd, certified mail, return receipt requested. Same mailman, same porch steps. But this time it wasn't a notice. It was a demand letter, and the number printed at the bottom had a comma in it. Thomas had spent 2 weeks building the financial case. Through Verbo's legal compliance process, he had obtained the full earnings statement for the host account registered under Haley T., 3 years of booking records, payment deposits, occupancy rates, all tied directly to the property address. The total amount of rental income deposited into my mother's personal bank account from that basement rental was $64,200. The demand letter itself was 3 pages long, printed on Thomas's letterhead, calm, precise language. The kind of document that doesn't shout because it doesn't need to. It cited the clause in the trust granting exclusive authority over the property to the trustee. It cited state law regarding conversion of trust property income. Then, it politely requested full restitution of $64,200 within 60 days, or the trust would file a civil lawsuit. Attached were the Verbo earnings report, screenshots of the listing, the 52 guest reviews, and an archived copy of the listing recovered from the internet after my mother quietly deleted it 2 days earlier. She had apparently believed that deleting the listing would erase the evidence. It didn't. The internet remembers things long after people try to forget them. My mother didn't call me after that letter arrived. As far as I know, she didn't call anyone. But my father, Michael, did. He called me that evening, and for the first time in my life, he sounded like a man who had suddenly realized the ground beneath him had never belonged to him. "Nicole," he said quietly, "we don't have $64,000. Your mother, she spent it." He listed the things slowly. Brandon's truck, credit cards, a cruise they took the year before. "It's gone," he said. "That's something you'll need to discuss with Eleanor's lawyer," I replied. Silence followed. Then he asked quietly, "What happens if we can't pay?" "Then Thomas files the lawsuit." I heard him exhale, not in anger, more like the sound a building makes when the final supporting wall finally gives way. "Okay," he said. Then he hung up. $64,000. That's what it ultimately cost my parents to turn away a 10-year-old girl on Christmas. Except they hadn't saved it. They had spent it on trucks, vacations, and a lifestyle that had never truly been theirs, and now the receipt had arrived. What happened next I pieced together from 3 different sources. A voicemail my father left me at 2 a.m. that he probably didn't even remember leaving. A text conversation between Brandon and Jessica that Jessica later forwarded to me. And one very uncomfortable phone call from Jessica herself. The Turner family, the one my mother had spent 30 years carefully presenting to the outside world through church events, Facebook photos, and perfectly staged Christmas cards, began collapsing from the inside. It started with Brandon. For the first time in his life, he did the math. The truck my mother bought him? $28,000. The money she gave him for his apartment deposit? $8,000. He had always assumed that money came from my parents' retirement savings or my father's pension. It didn't. It came from a basement that wasn't my mother's. Inside a house that wasn't hers either, rented to strangers through an account tied directly to her bank. Brandon called my mother. I wasn't on the line, but Jessica later told me exactly how it went. "Mom, you told me Dad's pension paid for all this." "Don't you dare question me," Haley snapped. "After everything I've done for you." "You bought my truck with stolen money," Brandon said. The word "stolen" hung in the air long enough that my mother didn't speak for several seconds. Then she did what she always did. She redirected the blame. "If your father had ever been any kind of man," she said, "I wouldn't have had to." But this time something was different. Because Michael had finally reached his limit. "You rented the basement, Haley," my father Michael said. "You spent the money. Don't put this on me." According to Brandon, it was the first time my father had ever openly contradicted my mother in front of anyone. It was also about 20 years too late, and everyone in that room knew it. The next day, Jessica called me. Her voice sounded polite but strained, pitched just a little too high. "Nicole, I know we haven't been close, but Brandon and I didn't know about the Verbo money. Is there any way you could talk to the lawyer? Maybe work something out?" Jessica, I said, I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of this, but the trust belongs to Eleanor Whitaker. You'll need to speak with her attorney. She thanked me and ended the call. I think she was hoping for mercy, and honestly, she probably deserved some. But mercy wasn't mine to give. It belonged to Eleanor, and she had already given 12 years of it. She was finished. That same week, my mother posted on Facebook again. The message was shorter this time. When your own family betrays you. 12 reactions. 3. Then a fourth appeared, from someone I didn't recognize. Apparently, one of the people who had rented that basement. Janet, I stayed at your place once. Is that the same basement that used to be listed on Verbo? I thought your grandmother owned that house. 2 hours later, the entire post was deleted, but I had already taken the screenshot. The family my mother had spent decades presenting to the world, the one smiling in matching sweaters at church potlucks and Christmas dinners, while a little girl sat alone at a folding table, was coming apart. Not because I destroyed it, because the truth did. We were almost at the end, and what happened on move-out day was something even I didn't expect. The 30-day deadline fell on January 28th. I knew the date exactly. I had counted every day the way a nurse counts heartbeats on a monitor, carefully, precisely, knowing that the wrong number could change everything. The evening before the deadline, Thomas Caldwell emailed me. Deadline tomorrow. If they remain in the house, I will file the unlawful detainer action with Wake County Civil Court Monday morning. That afternoon, I drove past the house. I didn't stop. I didn't pull into the driveway. I simply slowed the car as I passed, the way people slow down when they drive by an accident. Both of my parents' cars were still in the driveway. The kitchen lights were on. The Christmas wreath still hung on the door, dried and browning around the edges. They hadn't even taken it down. They weren't leaving. That evening, my mother sent me a text. Not a phone call, just 6 words. We're not leaving. This is home. I forwarded the message to Thomas. His reply came 2 minutes later. Filing Monday. Brandon, at least, had understood the situation. He and Jessica had already found a small apartment in the North Hills district. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom. The security deposit had been paid by Jessica's parents. The day before the deadline, Brandon sent me a final message. I moved out. I'm done with this. But you should know Mom is telling people you're trying to have her arrested. I didn't reply. Around that same time, I noticed the Verbo listing had disappeared completely. My mother had deleted the page, removed the photos, erased the reviews. She probably believed that if the listing no longer existed, the evidence wouldn't exist either. But Thomas's paralegal had already archived the entire page through Internet Archives. Screenshots, cached listings, the host profile, everything. And the official Verbo earnings statement, obtained through legal request, existed independently of the website. You can delete a listing. You can't delete a bank deposit. Monday morning, Thomas Caldwell walked into Wake County Civil Court, carrying a folder nearly 3 inches thick. Inside were 30 days of silence, 52 guest reviews, and the determination of one 89-year-old woman who refused to let her family be redefined by the people who had taken advantage of it. Thomas filed the unlawful detainer action with every exhibit attached: the trust deed, the eviction notice with its certified mail receipt and USPS tracking record, the physician's competency letter, the signed trust amendment, and the full Verbo documentation. The clerk stamped the file, assigned a case number, and scheduled the hearing for 10 days later. Eviction cases move quickly. The law doesn't like confusion about who owns a house and who doesn't. 2 days later, on Wednesday afternoon, A process server walked up the steps to Eleanor Whitaker's house and knocked on the door. My father answered. The server handed him 2 copies of the summons, one addressed to him, one to my mother, and asked him to sign the acknowledgement of service. My father looked down at the papers, then back at the server, then down at the papers again. According to the affidavit the server filed later, my father's face turned gray. My mother wasn't home. She had gone to the grocery store, which meant my father had to be the one to tell her. I don't know exactly how that conversation unfolded, and honestly, I don't need to. I know what happened afterward. My mother started calling people. She called Pastor Daniel Reeves. She called Patricia Sullivan. She called 2 cousins. She worked the phones the way she always had, pulling the levers of sympathy she had carefully built over 30 years of church dinners, casseroles, and prayer chains. But this time something was different. The machine didn't respond the way it used to, because Pastor Daniel Reeves told her something she had not expected to hear. He told her he had spoken to me, and he had listened to Lily's voicemail. He suggested that she take some time to reflect. Patricia Sullivan didn't answer the phone at all. One cousin picked up and asked a single question. "Janet, is it true about the Verbo rental?" My mother hung up on her. And then there was Margaret Hill. Margaret Hill was 71 and lived 3 houses down from Eleanor Whitaker's place. She had been there nearly as long as the house itself. She had watched my parents come and go for 12 years, and she had seen something on Christmas night that she hadn't understood until later. She called me that Thursday evening. Her voice was soft and careful, the way people sound when they've been carrying something heavy inside their chest for weeks. "Nicole, honey, I need to tell you something." She explained that on Christmas night she had stepped out onto her porch to bring in her recycling. "That's when I saw your little girl," she said. She was walking down the sidewalk alone with a bag in her hands. It was so cold. Her voice faltered. "I almost called the police. I should have. I didn't understand what was happening. I thought maybe she was going to a friend's house or something, but it didn't feel right. And I didn't do anything." She paused. "I'm so sorry." I thanked her, and I meant it. Then I asked if she would be willing to provide a written statement if Thomas Caldwell needed one. She said yes before I even finished the sentence. The hearing was scheduled for Thursday. Wake County Civil Court, small courtroom, fluorescent lighting, beige walls. The judge was the Honorable Karen Yee, a woman who looked like she had heard 10,000 cases and remembered every detail of every one. Thomas sat at the petitioner's table. I sat behind him. Across the room were my parents. No lawyer. Robert Klein had declined to continue representing them after reviewing the Verbo evidence, or, more accurately, after learning Thomas intended to present it in open court. My mother hadn't found a replacement. She sat there in her beige wool coat and pearl earrings, hands folded in her lap like she was attending Sunday service. My father stared down at the table. Thomas presented the case in under 20 minutes. The trust deed, the eviction notice, the certified mail receipt with USPS tracking and my mother's signature, the physician's competency letter, the signed trust amendment. Then he introduced the Verbo documentation as a supplementary exhibit, the earnings statement, the listing screenshots, the guest reviews, the archived internet copy of the listing. Judge Yee reviewed the documents quietly. Then she looked up at my mother. "Ma'am, do you wish to respond?" My mother stood and smoothed the front of her coat. "Your Honor," she said carefully, "we have maintained that house for 18 years. We are family. This is simply a family disagreement, and I believe it can be resolved privately." Judge Yee glanced back down at the file. Then she asked a single question. Ma'am, did you receive rental income from the trust property? My mother's fingers tightened on the edge of the table.
That was just a small, Judgy interrupted gently.
Did you, or did you not, receive rental income from property held in a trust for which you are not the trustee? The courtroom went very quiet. I could hear the ventilation system humming above us. Yes, my mother finally said.
Judge Yi delivered her ruling 11 minutes later. Writ of possession granted. Haley and Michael Turner were ordered to vacate the property within 10 days. Regarding the Verbo income, the judge noted that the trust had standing to pursue a civil claim for conversion of trust property income and advised the parties to either pursue mediation or proceed to civil court. This time my mother cried. Not the theatrical crying she had performed in the nursing home lobby. Real tears. The kind that come when someone realizes the story they have been telling about themselves no longer has any pages left. My father sat beside her, hands on his knees, staring at the floor. Thomas calmly gathered the documents. I stood up and walked out through the courtroom doors into the hallway. There was no dramatic music, no slow-motion moment. Just a woman holding a manila folder with a court order inside it, walking toward an elevator under dull fluorescent lights. The judge hadn't raised her voice. She didn't need to. The documents spoke for themselves. They usually do when you take the time to keep them. My parents moved out on a Saturday in mid-February. I know because Dana Brooks drove past the house that afternoon. I had asked her to, not because I needed to see it, but because some part of me needed to know it had actually happened. There was a rented moving truck in the driveway. My father carried lamps and cardboard boxes down the porch steps. My mother stood on the porch directing him, arms folded tightly across her coat. Neighbors watched quietly from their porches and driveways, not with excitement, just with the quiet attention people give when a long-running neighborhood story finally changes. Dana told me something else. My mother took everything. The furniture, the kitchenware, Brandon's childhood trophies from the upstairs shelf, the Christmas dishes she had used for the dinner Lily wasn't allowed to attend. She took the curtains. She even removed the bathroom mirror she had installed above the sink. But she left one thing behind. The photograph. The framed picture of Eleanor Whitaker standing in front of the house the day she bought it in 1987. On the back of the frame were the words Eleanor had written decades earlier. For my family, all of them. The photograph was still hanging on the wall when my parents locked the door behind them. At 3:14 p.m., Dana sent me a text. They're gone. The next morning I drove to the house. Lily was with me. Inside, the place felt cold. My parents had turned the thermostat down before leaving. It was one last small act of pettiness in a long list of them. The house felt cold and hollow. The rooms were empty, dust gathering quietly in the corners. Sunlight came through the bare windows and stretched across the hardwood floors Eleanor Whitaker had chosen almost 40 years earlier. In the living room, I found the photograph. It was still hanging on the wall, slightly crooked. I took it down, wiped the glass with my sleeve, and hung it back, straight, centered, exactly where it belonged. My parents moved into a one-bedroom apartment in Cary, paying $1,400 a month. It was the first rent payment they had made in 12 years. The eviction judgment was now part of their public court record, which meant any future landlord running a background check would see it. Thomas Caldwell also informed them that the $64,200 claim remained active. If they did not agree to a repayment plan within 60 days, the trust would file a civil lawsuit. My mother had taken the Christmas dishes, but she left the photograph. Maybe, somewhere deep down, she understood which ones she had earned and which ones she hadn't. We moved into the house at the end of February. Lily walked up the porch steps carrying her backpack, the same steps where she had stood on Christmas night, holding a bag of gifts no one wanted. She paused at the front door and looked at me. "Is this ours?" she asked. "This is Great-Grandma Eleanor's," I told her. "She's letting us take care of it." Lily nodded like that explanation made perfect sense. It often does when you're 10 years old and trust hasn't been completely broken yet. She chose the upstairs bedroom, the one with the window looking out over the backyard where Eleanor used to keep a vegetable garden. The room was empty, just sunlight and pale walls. Lily stepped inside and spun around once with her arms out, like she was testing the size of the space. I stood in the doorway watching her. I didn't try to name the feeling in my chest, because I knew if I did, I might fall apart. Thomas finalized the paperwork. The trust remained in Eleanor's name. She was still the trustee. But I was now the named beneficiary and caretaker of the property. I would pay the taxes, maintain the house, handle the insurance. It wasn't a gift. It was responsibility. And I was grateful for that difference. That evening, I called Eleanor on FaceTime. One of the nurses helped prop the phone on her tray table. She watched Lily taping a hand-drawn sign to her bedroom door. Lily's room, with a small sun drawn in the corner. Eleanor smiled. "The little sun is home," she said. That week, I enrolled Lily in a Saturday art class at the community center. After Christmas, she had stopped drawing. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just quietly, the way light fades when someone pulls a curtain. She stopped carrying her sketchbook. She stopped putting little suns on things. But the first Saturday after her art class, she came home holding a large sheet of butcher paper rolled under her arm. She spread it across the kitchen table. It was a drawing. A house. In the center of the house was a large table, and around that table were 14 chairs, drawn carefully in a circle. Each chair had a name written on it. Great-Grandma Eleanor, Mom, Aunt Dana, Mrs. Hill, and in the center chair, the one facing the window, Lily. She didn't draw herself sitting at a small table anymore. She drew herself at the big one, and every chair had a small sun beside it. That same month, I did something for myself. Something I probably should have done years earlier. I started seeing a therapist. Not because I was broken, but because growing up in a family like mine leaves patterns you don't notice until someone points them out. In our first session, I sat in a comfortable chair, nicer than any furniture I had owned before, and told a woman with kind eyes that I had spent most of my life trying to be small enough to keep the peace. She asked gently, "And how did that work out?" I almost laughed. It didn't. "No," she said softly. "It rarely does." In March, a letter arrived. Not certified mail, not from a lawyer, just a plain envelope with my mother's handwriting on the front. The loops were careful and controlled, the way she always wrote when she wanted to appear composed. I opened it at the kitchen table while Lily was at school. The letter contained 8 words. "Nicole, I'm your mother. This has gone far enough. Can we talk?" No apology, no acknowledgement of what she had done to Lily, no mention of Eleanor, no explanation for the $64,200 she had taken. Just, "Can we talk?" As if the problem was a conversation that hadn't happened instead of a lifetime of choices that had. I folded the letter, slipped it back into the envelope, and placed it in the receipts folder. The same folder that held the voicemail transcript, the Verbo screenshots, the court filings, every document that told the real story of what family had meant inside that house. I didn't respond. But I didn't block her number either. If she ever wanted to contact me, she could go through Thomas Caldwell. That was the boundary.
and a boundary isn't a punishment. It's simply a door that finally works the way doors are supposed to. You could knock, but you couldn't simply walk in and rearrange the furniture. That same week, Eleanor Whitaker called me again. Her voice sounded a little tired, but it was still steady, still clear. The voice of someone who had already made peace with most things in life and was working through the rest. "I'm not angry with Haley, Nicole," she said quietly. "I'm disappointed, but I will never allow disappointment to come before my great-granddaughter's safety. Not ever." Spring arrived slowly that year. Lily started riding her bike along the sidewalk in front of the house. Margaret Hill waved from her porch most afternoons, and sometimes showed up with banana bread wrapped in foil. Dana Brooks came by on Fridays with takeout. The radiator in our old apartment didn't tick anymore, because we didn't live there anymore. I only thought about that sometimes, usually late at night when I sat on Eleanor's porch. The same porch where my daughter had stood in the cold 5 months earlier, holding a bag of presents for people who told her she didn't deserve a chair at their table. Sometimes I remember the question Lily asked me that night in our apartment. "Mom, am I a problem?" And I think about the drawing she made in art class. 14 chairs, each one carefully labeled, each one marked with a small sun. I realized something while looking at that drawing. Family isn't a seat at a table. Family is how people treat you when they think no one is watching. And someone had been watching all along. A 10-year-old girl holding a bag of gifts. A girl with a memory that doesn't forget. She's 11 now, and she still draws suns on everything. The front door of this house stays open. That's our story. Mine and Lily's. If there's one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this. Silence does not keep a family together. Respect does. For years, I believed that staying quiet, making myself smaller, and avoiding conflict would protect the people I loved. In reality, it only allowed the wrong things to continue. A family should never require a child to earn a seat at the table, and it should never punish someone for telling the truth. The moment my daughter asked if she was a problem, everything became clear. Protecting her mattered more than protecting anyone's pride, reputation, or comfort. Sometimes standing up for what is right will make you look like the villain to people who benefited from your silence. That doesn't mean you're wrong. Family is not defined by blood, traditions, or a house. It's defined by who shows up with kindness when it matters most. And if someone tries to make you believe you don't belong, remember this. The right people will always make room for you. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of this story. If it moved you, please take a moment to like the video. It really helps more people discover stories like this. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and standing up for someone you love? Or have you ever been the one standing outside that door, hoping someone would open it? If this story meant something to you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Your support keeps this channel growing and helps these stories reach people who feel alone. And don't miss the next story.